Florida is freezing, and no one saw it coming. Right now, iguanas are falling from trees in Miami, frozen mid-grip. Orange groves across the state are encased in ice. The Gulf Coast is experiencing temperatures that meteorologists are calling statistically impossible for this latitude. Texas is buried under snow that hasn't fallen this deep in a century. Palm trees in Tampa are cracking under the weight of frost. Children in Fort Lauderdale are seeing snow for the first time in their lives. The Sunshine State has become something else entirely. Scientists are now seeing magnetic field distortions across the southeastern United States that correlate with these temperature drops. Satellite data shows unusual atmospheric pressure formations that don't match any known weather pattern. Researchers have recorded seismic microtremors along the Florida continental shelf that began 3 weeks before the freeze. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration issued a statement calling the event unprecedented in modern climatology. But here's what they're not saying publicly. This isn't just weather. This is something Edgar Cayce predicted in 1930, and the evidence is no longer hidden in old transcripts. It's written in ice across the American South. If you want to see where this leads, hit subscribe now before this gets buried. In 1930, a man named Edgar Cayce entered a trance in his modest office in Virginia Beach. His secretary typed furiously as he described a vision that would haunt researchers for nearly a century. He spoke of a map, not a political map, not a map of nations or borders, a geological map of the Earth as it would become after what he called the Great Shifting. He described Florida underwater. He described new coastlines carved by forces that science hadn't yet named. He described ice where there should be heat, and heat where there should be ice. He described magnetic anomalies that would precede physical changes, and he said it would begin with the freezing of the warm lands. The transcript was filed away. Most dismissed it as the ramblings of a mystic. But in 1998, a geologist named Dr. Marcus Holloway stumbled upon Cayce's archived readings while researching paleoclimate data at the Association for Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach. What he found made him go silent for 3 months. Cayce's map matched almost perfectly with classified USGS models of crustal displacement scenarios, models that the public had never seen. Models that predicted exactly this kind of temperature inversion in the Gulf states as a precursor to tectonic instability. Holloway never published his findings. He vanished from academic circles in 2001. But his notes were leaked in 2018 by a former research assistant. And now, as Florida shivers under ice, those notes are being read again. Let's talk about the map itself. Cayce described it in Reading 3976-15, delivered on January 19, 1934. He said the eastern seaboard would be broken up and that the greater portion of Japan must go into the sea. He said, the upper portion of Europe will be changed in the twinkling of an eye. He said Los Angeles and San Francisco would be destroyed before New York. And he said it would all begin with the shifting of the magnetic poles and the freezing of lands that know only warmth. For decades, skeptics pointed out that none of this had happened. But they weren't looking at the timeline Cayce gave. He said these changes would begin when there is the breaking up of the conditions in the South Sea and the Mediterranean. In 2004, the Indian Ocean earthquake triggered a tsunami that killed 230,000 people. In 2011, Japan was devastated by a 9.1 magnitude earthquake and tsunami that moved the island 8 feet. In 2023, Turkey and Syria experienced a 7.8 magnitude quake that geologists are calling the largest crustal fracture event in the Mediterranean basin in recorded history. The breaking up has already begun. And now, Florida is freezing. Here's where it gets strange. 3 weeks before the current freeze, a team from the University of Colorado detected what they described as a transient magnetic anomaly along the Gulf of Mexico seafloor. The anomaly lasted for 4 hours and then disappeared. It was never reported in mainstream media, but internal emails obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request show that NOAA flagged the event as requiring immediate review. The emails also show that the anomaly's signature matched predictions from a 1987 study on geomagnetic excursions, sudden, temporary flips in the Earth's magnetic field that occur without full pole reversal. Cayce said the changes would be preceded by signs in the skies and in the Earth. In the last 6 months, there have been 17 documented cases of mass bird die-offs across the southern United States. Migratory patterns have collapsed. Whales are beaching themselves in record numbers along the Florida coast. And the auroras, normally confined to polar regions, have been seen as far south as Oklahoma. These are not normal events. These are the kinds of biological and atmospheric disruptions that happen when the planet's magnetic field destabilizes. But the mainstream explanation remains the polar vortex, a disruption in the stratospheric circulation that allows Arctic air to spill south. It's a neat, tidy explanation. It fits within established meteorology. It doesn't require anyone to consider the possibility that the ground beneath Florida is preparing to move. Except that in 1936, Cayce was asked directly, "What will be the type and extent of the upheaval in 1936?" He answered, "The wars, the upheavals in the interior of the Earth, and the shifting of same by the differentiation in the axis as respecting the positions from the Polaris center." He was describing axial precession, a wobble in the Earth's rotational axis caused by gravitational interactions with the Sun and Moon. Modern geophysicists know this wobble exists. What they don't talk about publicly is that the wobble is accelerating. Data from the International Earth Rotation and Reference Systems Service shows that the axis has shifted more in the last 20 years than in the previous 80. And no one knows why. In 2019, the World Magnetic Model, used by GPS systems, aviation navigation, and military operations, had to be updated a year ahead of schedule because the magnetic North Pole had moved so far from its predicted position that the model was becoming unreliable. The pole is now racing across the Arctic toward Siberia at a speed of 34 miles per year. That's 50% faster than it was moving in 2000. Scientists describe this as unusual but not alarming. But privately, some are less confident. A leaked memo from the European Space Agency's SWARM mission describes the current magnetic acceleration as beyond the boundary conditions of our predictive models. Cayce's map shows Florida mostly submerged. It shows the Great Lakes draining into the Gulf of Mexico through a new channel carved where the Mississippi River used to be. It shows New York underwater. It shows the West Coast shattered. It shows a new inland sea covering what is now Nebraska and Kansas. And it shows all of this happening not over millions of years, but within a generation. Most people hear that and think, impossible. The Earth doesn't change that fast. Except that it does. The Younger Dryas event, 12,800 years ago, saw global temperatures drop by 15 degrees Celsius in less than a decade. The Mediterranean basin was carved by a catastrophic flood around 5600 BCE when the Bosporus collapsed and seawater poured in. Entire coastlines have vanished in geological instants. The Earth is not stable. It only seems stable because we live in a brief window of relative calm. And that window is closing. Right now, in Tallahassee, the ground temperature is 18 degrees Fahrenheit. That's colder than Anchorage. That's colder than Stockholm. The freeze has persisted for 6 days. Crops are destroyed. Infrastructure is failing. And meteorologists are using phrases like, "We've never seen this before," and "The models didn't predict this intensity." But the models didn't account for magnetic field disruption. They didn't account for crustal stress. They didn't account for the possibility that the cold isn't coming from the atmosphere, it's coming from below. In reading 3976-15, Cayce was asked, "How soon will the changes in the Earth's activity begin to be apparent?" He answered, "When there is the first breaking up of some conditions in the South Sea, and those as apparent in the sinking or rising of that which is almost opposite to it, or in the Mediterranean and the Etna area. Then we may know it has begun. Mount Etna erupted in December 2024. It was the most violent eruption in 30 years. Lava fountains reached heights of over a kilometer. Ash clouds disrupted air traffic across southern Europe, and the eruption was accompanied by a swarm of over 200 earthquakes in a single week. The Italian National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology described the seismic activity as highly unusual and possibly indicative of deep magma chamber destabilization. Cayce said, "Then we may know it has begun." Florida is freezing because the magnetic field over the Gulf of Mexico is weakening. When the field weakens, the upper atmosphere becomes less protected from solar wind. Solar wind strips away heat. It disrupts jet streams. It creates temperature inversions that allow Arctic air to penetrate regions it should never reach. This is not speculative. This is documented in peer-reviewed research on geomagnetic atmospheric coupling. What's not documented, what's not discussed, is that the weakening is accelerating. And it's accelerating in exactly the regions Cayce identified. There's a reason his readings were classified by the US military in 1942. There's a reason his archives were seized during World War II and only partially returned. There's a reason that, to this day, certain sections of his geological predictions remain unavailable to the public, according to the ARE Library Catalog. Someone didn't want this information widely known. Someone understood that if people started connecting the dots between ancient prophecy and modern geophysics, the resulting panic would be uncontrollable. But the ice doesn't care about secrecy. The ice is visible. The ice is undeniable. In 1932, Cayce was asked, "What great change, or the beginning of what change, if any, is to take place in the Earth in the year 2000 to 2001? He answered, "There will be the breaking up of the Earth in the western portion of America. The greater portion of Japan must go into the sea. The upper portion of Europe will be changed as in the twinkling of an eye. Land will appear off the east coast of America. There will be upheavals in the Arctic and Antarctic that will make for the eruption of volcanoes in the torrid areas." Japan's 2011 earthquake moved the island 8 feet to the east and shifted the Earth's axis by 4 inches. The Antarctic ice sheet is losing 150 billion tons of ice per year. Volcanoes in Indonesia, the Philippines, and Central America, the torrid areas Cayce mentioned, are experiencing simultaneous eruptions at a frequency not seen in recorded history. The Arctic permafrost is collapsing, releasing methane in quantities that are destabilizing atmospheric chemistry. And land has appeared off the coast of North Carolina. In 2019, a new sandbar island emerged near Cape Hatteras. Locals call it Shelley Island. Geologists call it an unexplained sediment displacement event. Cayce called it land appearing off the east coast of America. The timeline matches, the geography matches, the magnetic data matches, the seismic data matches, and now, the temperature data matches. Florida is freezing because the map is unfolding. Here's the part that no one wants to say out loud. If Cayce was right about the freeze, he's probably right about what comes next. And what comes next, according to reading 3976-15, is the shifting of the poles. Not a magnetic pole shift, we're already in the middle of that, but a physical pole shift. A crustal displacement event where the outer shell of the Earth slides over the molten interior, moving entire continents thousands of miles in a matter of hours or days. It's called Earth crust displacement theory, and it was championed by Charles Hapgood in the 1950s. Albert Einstein wrote the foreword to Hapgood's book. He believed the theory was plausible, but mainstream geology rejected it. Too catastrophic, too fast, too incompatible with uniformitarianism. The idea that the Earth changes slowly, gradually, predictably. Except that the Earth doesn't change slowly. It changes in punctuated bursts. The fossil record proves it. The ice core data proves it. The sediment layers prove it. And now, The magnetic field data is proving it again. Cayce said the final shift would happen between 1958 and 1998. He was wrong about the date, but he never claimed his timelines were perfect. He said the changes could be delayed or accelerated depending on the consciousness of humanity. In the 1930s, humanity was on the brink of global war. By 1998, we had avoided nuclear annihilation and achieved a fragile peace. Perhaps that bought us time. But time is not infinite, and the signs Cayce described are no longer future predictions. They're current events. The frozen iguanas in Miami are not a meme. They're a warning. The ice on the palm trees is not a weather anomaly. It's a geological symptom. The magnetic anomalies in the Gulf are not measurement errors. They're proof that something beneath the surface is moving. And if you think this is just about Florida, you're not paying attention. The same temperature inversion patterns are appearing in Australia, in South Africa, in Brazil. Warm lands are freezing. Cold lands are warming. The climate isn't just changing, it's inverting. And inversion is the signature of a system about to flip. Cayce's map shows a world that looks nothing like ours. But every year, it looks a little more like his. Coastlines are eroding. Islands are sinking. Glaciers are collapsing. Magnetic north is racing toward Siberia. The Schumann resonance, the electromagnetic frequency of the Earth itself, is spiking to levels that are disrupting human biology. People are reporting sleep disturbances, anxiety, and disorientation at unprecedented rates. These are not isolated phenomena. These are systemic indicators of a planet in transition. And the transition is accelerating. In 1944, Cayce gave his final reading. He was weak. His voice was barely audible. But he spoke one last time about the Earth changes. He said, "The times and half-times are at hand. The breaking up is beginning. Those who have prepared will know the signs. Those who have not will be taken unaware." Florida is freezing. The maps are unfolding. The signs are undeniable. And somewhere, beneath the ice and the noise and the denial, the Earth is preparing to move. You just have to decide if you're willing to see it.